There is a carving on the wall of a room buried beneath a temple in southern Egypt, and it shows something that should not have existed for another 2,000 years. A man stands holding a giant glass bulb. Inside the bulb is a snake, stretched from one end to the other like a glowing thread of wire. Underneath it runs a long cable. At the base sits a strange pillar that looks like it was made to hold a current. The whole image reads like a diagram of electrical equipment, and it was cut into solid stone before the Roman Empire existed. Most people who visit Dendera never see it. The carving is in a cramped underground chamber, sealed off from the main temple, the kind of place tour groups never go. Most people walk right past it, but hidden in that room is a picture that the greatest electrical mind who ever lived would have recognized in a heartbeat. Because the thing carved into that wall is the exact idea Nikola Tesla spent the last 40 years of his life chasing. And he died broke, alone, and silent about where that idea might have come from. So here is what we are going to do. We are going to look at exactly what is carved on that wall. We are going to trace why Tesla burned through 3 fortunes trying to rebuild it. And we are going to look at a real physics study published in a real peer-reviewed journal that found the same principle hidden inside the Great Pyramid. By the end of this, you are going to understand what that chamber was built to do, what the pyramid may have actually powered, and why the official explanation for all of it leaves out the one detail that changes everything. Stay with me, because the part everyone argues about is not the part that should unsettle you. Let me show you the object first. The carving sits inside the Temple of Hathor at Dendera, about 2.5 kilometers from the Nile in Upper Egypt. The temple you can walk through today was built late, started around 54 BCE, under a pharaoh named Ptolemy XII, finished under Roman rule. But it was raised on top of far older foundations, rebuilt again and again on the same sacred ground, going back more than 2,000 years before that. The Egyptians did not pick random spots for temples. They built where something had always been. Beneath the floor of that temple is a network of narrow stone passages the Egyptians called crypts, sealed chambers. No windows, no natural light. They were so hidden that some were not properly documented until the modern era. And on the walls of one of these crypts is a set of reliefs that do not fit anything else in Egyptian art. 3 carvings, each one shows the same thing. An enormous teardrop-shaped object, taller than a man, with a long snake curling inside it from end to end. The object rests on or connects to a pillar, and a line runs out of the narrow end like a cord. Standing beside it, figures hold the structure up, and one of them points it outward, toward the open room. When the first Egyptologists studied these reliefs in the 19th century, they had an answer ready. The snake is a god named Harsamtis, a form of the falcon god Horus. The teardrop is a container the Egyptians called the hen, possibly a symbol of the womb of the sky goddess. The whole scene, they said, is a creation myth. A serpent of light being born from a lotus flower, the way the sun is reborn at dawn. The pillar holding it up is the Jide pillar, a symbol of stability. The inscriptions around the carving describe offerings of incense and lotus to the god. Case closed. Religious art, nothing more. And for over 100 years, that was the official story. For decades, scholars dismissed the carving as symbolic, a picture of a myth drawn by a people obsessed with gods and rebirth. But that explanation has a problem, because the moment electricity entered the modern world, people who had never studied Egyptian religion looked at that same carving and saw something the priests could never have intended. They saw a light bulb, not a vague resemblance. Look at the parts. The glass-shaped envelope, the thin filament inside, running the full length exactly where a filament sits. The cable feeding into the base. The pedestal that looks like a fixture or a power source. Engineers pointed out that it does not just look like any bulb. It looks specifically like a Crookes tube, an early vacuum tube from the 1870s, the kind of device that produces a glowing discharge inside sealed glass when you run a current through it. The serpent of light. A glowing line, sealed in a transparent shell, fed by a cable, sitting on a stand. Here is where it gets strange. To accept the standard reading, you have to believe a culture that drew everything with brutal literalism. Birds that are exact species, tools rendered to scale, just happened to draw their snake god inside the precise shape of a technology that would not be invented for 19 centuries, fed by the precise cable a real device would need, glowing the precise way a real discharge tube glows. Maybe that is coincidence. Coincidence is real, but it is a lot of coincidence stacked into one carving. And it is the first of 3 clues, because once you stop assuming the picture is only a myth, 3 details on that wall stop looking like decoration and start looking like a schematic. The first clue is the bulb itself and what is inside it. In the relief, the snake does not lie at the bottom of the container the way a real animal would. It floats, suspended down the center, from the cable end to the tip. That is not how Egyptians drew snakes anywhere else. Their serpents coil, rear, or slither along a surface. This one is held in the air inside a sealed shell, which is exactly and only what a filament does. A filament is a thread that glows when current passes through it. It cannot lie on the floor of the bulb. It has to be suspended in the center so the charge runs end to end. The Egyptians drew their serpent of light, doing the one thing a snake cannot do and a filament must. The mainstream answer is that the floating snake represents the god emerging, rising, being born into the world. And in religious terms, that is a perfectly good reading. But notice what it leaves unexplained. Why this shape? Why this container? Why a cable? A creation myth does not need a cord running into a pedestal. The sun being reborn does not require wiring. The religious story explains the snake. It does not explain the hardware drawn around the snake. And the hardware is the part that should not be there. That is the first clue. The second is the one that turns a strange picture into something closer to a blueprint. Follow the cable. In the relief, the line that runs out of the narrow end of the bulb does not just trail off. It connects, it runs down to the base, into a structure, and that structure is the jawed pillar, the support the Egyptians associated with stability and the spine of a god. Engineers who looked at the scene noticed something the priests would have had no reason to draw. The jawed pillar in this carving is positioned exactly where an insulator goes. It holds the glowing element up and away from everything else, separating the live part from the people standing nearby, which is the entire job of a high-voltage support. And the cable does not run to nowhere. It runs to a box held by a kneeling figure, a box that sits at the bottom of the whole assembly like a source. Now hold that thought, because here is a fact that has nothing to do with Dendera. In 1936, in a village near Baghdad, archaeologists dug up a small clay jar. Inside it was a copper cylinder, and inside that, an iron rod. It is roughly 2,000 years old. And when modern researchers built a copy and filled it with an acidic liquid like vinegar or grape juice, it produced a measurable electrical voltage. A battery. Not a theory of a battery, a working one, made from materials the ancient world absolutely had. We call it the Baghdad battery. Mainstream archaeology is still split on what it was for, but it proves one thing beyond argument. The components for electricity, a vessel, 2 metals, and a conductive fluid existed in the ancient Near East. The knowledge of how to make current was not impossible. It was sitting in the dirt. So, in the Dendera relief, you have a glowing element suspended like a filament, a cable, an insulating support, and a box at the base where the power would come from. The mainstream reading explains every piece as a separate religious symbol that happens to line up into a functioning circuit. Maybe it does, but that is the second clue. The third is the one that no theory of symbolism can wave away, because it is not on the wall, it is the room itself. The crypt is underground. It has no windows, it has no light shafts, it is one of the most cramped, sealed, deliberately hidden spaces in the entire temple. And it is covered floor to ceiling in some of the finest, most detailed carving in all of Egypt, which raises a question that sounds simple and turns out to be a nightmare. How did they see what they were doing? To carve relief this precise, the artists needed steady, bright, sustained light for weeks or months in total darkness, deep underground. The obvious answer is fire: torches, oil lamps, candles. But fire has a signature it cannot hide. It produces soot. Burn an open flame in a sealed stone room, and the ceiling turns black. Carbon settles on everything. We can read it. In tombs and chambers where the Egyptians did use torches, the soot is still there thousands of years later. And in these crypts, at Dendera, on these ceilings, above these specific carvings, there is no soot layer where you would expect a worker to have held a flame for months on end. They lit a windowless underground room well enough to do museum-grade carving, and they did it without leaving the burn marks that fire always leaves. The standard explanation is mirrors. The idea is that the Egyptians used polished metal to bounce sunlight down through the passages, relay after relay, into the dark. And on paper, that works. But test it in practice, and it collapses fast. Every bounce off ancient polished bronze loses a huge fraction of the light. By the time you snake sunlight around multiple stone corners and down into a sealed crypt, there is almost nothing left. Not enough to carve by. Not for months. The mirror theory is the kind of answer that sounds reasonable until you actually try to do the work in the dark. The lighting of these chambers is a genuine unsolved problem, not a fringe claim, a real gap. They lit the unlightable, and the standard answer does not hold. So those are the three clues. A glowing element drawn the way only a filament can be drawn, a cable, an insulator, and a power source built into a religious scene that does not need them, and a sealed underground room that was somehow lit brightly for a long time with no fire. Three details, each one explainable on its own. All three together, in the same chamber, pointing at the same impossible idea, that the people who carved this knew something about light and energy that we were told they could not have known. For decades, that was where the story stopped, as a curiosity, a coincidence, an argument between believers and skeptics. Then modern science looked at a different Egyptian structure and found something that changed everything. 500 kilometers north of Dendera stands the Great Pyramid of Giza, built for the pharaoh Khufu around 2560 BCE. Over 2 million blocks of stone, the tallest structure on Earth for nearly 4,000 years. And for most of that time, we assumed we understood what it was. A tomb, a grave for a king, except no king was ever found inside it. No body, no treasure. No name carved in the burial chamber. The most magnificent tomb ever built was left silent and empty, and the simple story has never fully explained why. In 2018, a team of physicists decided to ask a question no archaeologist had asked. Not what the pyramid meant, what the pyramid does. Researchers from ITMO University in St. Petersburg, working with the Laserzentrum Hanover in Germany, modeled the Great Pyramid not as a monument, but as an object interacting with electromagnetic waves. They published their results in the Journal of Applied Physics. This is not a documentary claim or a podcast theory. It is a peer-reviewed paper in one of the most respected physics journals in the world. And here is what they found. When you hit the Great Pyramid with radio waves of the right length, somewhere between 200 and 600 meters, the structure does something specific. It resonates. And under those resonant conditions, the pyramid concentrates electromagnetic energy. It does not scatter it evenly. It focuses it. And it focuses it in two places, inside the pyramid's internal chambers, and directly underneath its base, in the exact spot where the unfinished, mostly ignored subterranean chamber sits, carved into the bedrock below the entire structure. Read that again. A team of physicists modeled the most famous building on Earth and concluded that its geometry makes it behave like a resonator. An antenna, a shape that collects invisible energy and pools it in its hidden rooms and in the rock beneath it. The researchers, careful scientists, framed it modestly. They were interested in using the geometry to design tiny particles for sensors and solar cells. They were not claiming the Egyptians built a power plant, but they could not change what the math said. The shape gathers energy, the chambers concentrate it. That is not mythology. That is the measured physical behavior of the object. And this is the idea that a small group of engineers had been arguing for years before the physicists ever ran the numbers. The most prominent is a master machinist named Christopher Dunn, who spent decades insisting the Great Pyramid was never a tomb at all. He argued it was a machine, a structure built to draw energy out of the Earth itself, tuned to the planet's natural vibration, exactly the way a modern power station is tuned to its source. Mainstream Egyptology rejected him. Researchers like Graham Hancock and Robert Bauval pushed similar ideas about a lost, advanced layer of the ancient world, and were dismissed as fantasists. And then a peer-reviewed physics paper quietly confirmed the one thing they all needed to be true, that the pyramid, by its shape, concentrates energy in its chambers. The fringe theory and the laboratory result pointed at the same conclusion. And there is a detail in the stone that makes the energy idea harder to dismiss than it should be. The king's chamber, the room at the heart of the pyramid, is not built from the soft local limestone the rest of the structure uses. It is faced entirely in granite, hauled more than 500 miles up the Nile from quarries at Aswan, block by multi-ton block, when easy stone sat right next to the site. The Egyptians chose the harder, heavier, far more difficult rock for this one room. And Aswan granite is more than half quartz crystal. Quartz is not an ordinary mineral. When you squeeze it, vibrate it, or put it under mechanical stress, it generates an electrical charge. This is a real, measured, undisputed property. We call it the piezoelectric effect, and we use it today in everything from watches to medical sensors. The most reinforced room in the Great Pyramid is built from one of the most electrically active natural materials on the planet, stacked under hundreds of tons of compressive load. The mainstream answer is that granite was prestigious, that it honored the king. Maybe. But prestige does not explain why the one room they overbuilt with the most quartz-rich stone they could find happens to be the same room the resonance model lights up. And the pyramid is still hiding things from us. In 2017, a separate international project called Scan Pyramids used cosmic ray particles called muons, which pass through solid rock and reveal empty spaces, to scan the structure without touching a stone. They found a void, a massive cavity, over 100 feet long, sealed in the masonry above the Grand Gallery, that no record, no map, and no archaeologist had ever documented. 3 independent teams, using 3 different detection methods, all saw the same empty space in the same place. It has never been entered. We have been climbing through this building, measuring it, writing books about it for 200 years. And in 2017, we discovered a room the size of an airliner that nobody knew was there. If we missed something that large, the obvious question becomes impossible to ignore. What else is inside that we have not reached yet? And what was all of it built to hold? Now, connect it back to the wall at Dendera. In one place in Egypt, you have a carving of a glowing device fed by a cable. In another, you have a structure that physics says behaves like an energy collector, a picture of the output, and a machine for the source. And there is one man, separated from both by thousands of years, who looked at the natural world and concluded that this exact thing, drawing free energy from the planet and using it to light the world without wires, was not a fantasy. It was an engineering problem, and he believed he had almost solved it. His name was Nikola Tesla, and this is the secret he spent his life chasing. By 1899, Tesla was already the man who had given the world alternating current, the system that still powers your home right now. He could have stopped there, rich and celebrated. Instead, he moved to a laboratory in Colorado Springs, built a coil and a mast over 140 feet tall, and began doing something that terrified his neighbors. He started talking to the Earth. He pumped enormous high-frequency currents into the ground and the sky, generating artificial lightning, lighting bulbs at a distance with no wires connecting them at all. He watched lamps glow across an open field, powered by nothing he could point to. Witnesses described bulbs lighting up while planted loose in the dirt, sparks crawling along the ground, and a hum you could feel in your chest. Tesla did not think of his machine as a transmitter that threw energy outward and hoped some of it landed. He described it as a pump, a device that drew electricity out of the Earth, drove it back in at enormous speed, and set the whole planet ringing like a struck bell, so the ripples could be tapped anywhere on its surface. And on the 3rd of July, 1899, during a thunderstorm, Tesla recorded something that changed the rest of his life. As the storm rolled away across the plains, his instruments caught a pattern. He became convinced that the lightning had set off standing waves of electricity that were rolling all the way around the planet and coming back. Tesla concluded that the Earth itself, the space between the ground and the upper atmosphere, was a giant resonant cavity, a chamber. And if you could vibrate that chamber at the right frequency, the energy would not fade. It would build. It would circle the globe and reinforce itself, growing stronger with every pass until anyone, anywhere, could simply reach up and pull power out of the air. Tesla even calculated the frequency. He estimated the Earth's cavity resonated at around 8 cycles per second. People thought he was mad. Then, decades later, in the 1950s and 60s, long after he was dead, scientists measured it for real. The space between the Earth and the ionosphere does resonate. The fundamental frequency is about 7.83 cycles per second. We call it the Schumann resonance now. Tesla had been within a fraction of the right number, working it out by hand in 1899 from a lightning storm. This was the secret, not a single invention, a principle. The planet is humming with energy in a resonant cavity at a frequency you can tune to. Match it, and you get power without wires, power for free, power for everyone. Tesla said it himself in a single sentence that people quote to this day without understanding what he meant by it. If you want to find the secrets of the universe, think in terms of energy, frequency, and vibration. That was not poetry. That was a research program: energy, frequency, vibration. The Earth as a tuned chamber. The same 3 words you would use to describe what that 2018 study says the Great Pyramid does to a radio wave. To build it, Tesla raised a tower. On Long Island, in Shoreham, New York, starting in 1901, he constructed Wardenclyffe, a structure 187 feet tall, topped with an enormous copper dome, with iron roots driven 300 feet down into the Earth to grip the planet like an electrode. It was meant to be the first node in a global system, a network of towers that would light cities and run machines from the planet's own resonance. The financier, J.P. Morgan, put up the money, around $150,000, a fortune at the time, and then it died. The way every story like this dies. Here is where it gets strange. Morgan pulled his funding. The official reason was cost and slow progress and the financial panic of 1907. But there is a darker reading that has followed this story for a century. The moment Morgan understood that Tesla's real goal was energy that was free, energy that could not be metered, billed, or sold, the project became worthless to a man who made money selling power. You cannot put a meter on the sky. Whatever the reason, the money vanished. Tesla could not finish. The Great Tower stood unused for years, and in 1917 it was torn down and sold for scrap to pay his debts. The most ambitious machine of his life, demolished for metal. Tesla spent his final decades chasing the same idea, alone, increasingly broke, working out of hotel rooms. He died in January 1943, in a room at the Hotel New Yorker, with almost nothing to his name. And the moment he died, the story takes its final strange turn. Federal agents moved on his belongings. His papers, his notes, the records of a lifetime spent trying to pull energy out of the earth were taken into government custody by the Office of Alien Property. An electrical engineer named John Trump was brought in to examine them and decide what was dangerous and what was not. To this day, questions linger about exactly what was in those papers and where all of it ended up. So look at the shape of it. A carving of a powered light sealed in an Egyptian crypt and dismissed for a century. A pyramid that a physics journal says concentrates energy, ignored by the field it should have shaken. A genius who rediscovered the principle, got within 1 decimal of the Earth's true frequency, built the tower, and had the funding cut and the paper seized. It was carved, it was mocked, it was built. It was scrapped, and then it was taken. The same idea surfacing across 4,000 years, and every single time, it goes quiet. Now slow down, because this is the moment to be honest with you, and the truth deserves better than hype. Does any of this prove that the ancient Egyptians wired their temples, that the Great Pyramid was a working power station, and that Tesla was secretly reverse engineering a lost technology from a wall in Dendera? No, it does not. And I am not going to pretend it does. The grounded explanations have real weight. The Dendera relief is surrounded by hieroglyphic text, and that text plainly names the snake as the god Harsomptis and describes a religious ritual. The Egyptians who carved it told us, in writing, what they thought it was. The resemblance to a Crookes tube is striking, but the human brain is built to find familiar shapes, and a lotus, a serpent, and a pillar can line up into something that looks like a bulb without anyone intending a machine. The no-soot mystery is real, but absence of evidence is not proof of electric light. And the 2018 pyramid study, for all its credibility, assumed the structure was solid limestone, made simplifying guesses, and described a property of geometry, not a deliberate design. Lots of shapes resonate. A resonating shape is not a switched-on device. As for Tesla, there is no record that he ever saw the Dendera carving or based a single calculation on Egypt. He got to the idea through physics, not archaeology. So no, this is not proof of an ancient electrical grid. I will not insult you by selling you that. But here is what the careful, skeptical version still cannot make ordinary. Strip away every wild claim, and you are left with a set of plain facts that are arguably stranger than the fantasy. A culture that drew with relentless literalism, carved a glowing element suspended exactly like a filament, wired to a base. In a sealed room, they somehow lit without leaving fire. A separate Egyptian structure, the most studied building on the planet, was shown in a peer-reviewed physics journal to concentrate electromagnetic energy in its hidden chambers and beneath its base. And the single greatest electrical mind in human history became convinced that the Earth is a resonant chamber you can draw free power from, calculated its frequency by hand to within a fraction of the truth, built a tower to prove it, and was shut down before he could finish. You do not need ancient aliens to be unsettled by that. You just need to look at what is actually there. And if even the modest version of this is real, it means something uncomfortable about the story we tell ourselves. It means the idea Tesla died chasing, energy as resonance, power drawn from the vibration of the planet itself, is not science fiction. It is a real property of the world that one man nearly harnessed, and that, by accident or design, is built into the geometry of a 4,500-year-old structure in the Egyptian desert. It means a civilization we file under primitive may have been circling the same principle in stone that our most advanced inventor circled in a laboratory. And it means our picture of the ancient world is not a finished portrait. It is a sketch with the most important chapter torn out, which leaves one question that will not let go. The 2018 study did not just say the pyramid concentrates energy in its known rooms. It said the energy pools beneath the base in the subterranean chamber. And that chamber is the one part of the Great Pyramid we never finished exploring. It was left unfinished by the builders, cut rough into the bedrock, and it has been largely ignored for centuries because there was supposedly nothing there. The physics says that is exactly where the energy gathers. The one room we dismissed is the one room the math points to, and nobody has ever properly answered why the builders dug down into the rock beneath millions of tons of stone to carve a chamber and then left it raw and empty in the precise location where a resonator would focus its power. The carving is still there, in the dark, beneath the Temple of Hathor, the serpent of light glowing on a wall no sunlight has ever touched. The soot that should be there still missing. The subterranean chamber, under the Great Pyramid, is still raw, still unexplained, still sitting in the one spot the physicists say energy concentrates. And the papers of the man who came closest to proving why any of it matters were carried out of a hotel room the day he died and never fully returned to the public. It was carved, it was built, it was chased, and it was buried. If buried history like this is the kind that keeps you up at night, watch the next investigation playing on screen right now, because the discovery in that one connects to this in a way you will not see coming. Subscribe before you go so the next time something this old gives up a secret, you are the first to know.